All right, we're going to get started. Well, I want to welcome everyone to the Capital Budget Subcommittee, where we're meeting today for the purpose of decisions. I just want to remind everyone that there's really two pieces of the capital budget: the cash, which is what we call PAYGO, which we're going to be doing today, and then there's the general obligation stuff. That's like around legislative bond initiatives. That is not today. So those, just wanted to make that clear up front. With that, any questions from the subcommittee? I don't see any. Vice Chair McCray, always good to see you. Let's start.
We're going to start on page 1 of the document with the Department of Planning, and I'll turn it over to Andrew Gray.
Thank you. So, Department of Planning, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Okay. So we're going to just go through this real quick. If anyone has any objection or has anything to say, just let me know. Otherwise, we're gonna roll. Okay. Go ahead. Thank
On
you.
page 2, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance for the military department. The agency concurs.
Thank you. Next.
The Maryland Department of Emergency Management appears on page 3. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurs.
Okay. Next.
On page 4, it's the Department of General Services, PAYGO. This reflects an action related to Maryland Environmental Service, actually a $7.3 million general fund deficiency for the ECI cogen fuel conversion project. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance for this fiscal 22 deficiency. Agency concurred.
Okay. Next.
And then on page 5, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Legislative Services recommends deleting the $6.2 million general fund appropriation for the Natural Resources Police replacement helicopter. Agency disagreed, noting that operations did resume in October 2021 and that they have had a number of missions since then, between calendar 2016 to date.
Senator Alford.
I'll defer to Senator Eckert.
So I'd like to move to reject this. I think it's really important that we retain this very important aircraft. It needs replacement, and it's still operational on a regular basis, so thank you.
Thank you. Motion was made by Senator Eckert, seconded by Senator Alfred and Senator McCray. Any opposition? Great. Okay. It's rejected. Next.
All right, so the color page, the blueberry yogurt page, there's a restriction of $1 million for the Baltimore City Direct Grant until the submission of quarterly project status spreadsheets on the use of that funding.
You good with this, Senator McCray? Vice Chair?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Adopt.
All right, on page 6 in your regular documents, Department of Agriculture, DLS recommends concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Okay. Next.
On page 7 is the Interagency Commission on School Construction. DLS recommend concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Okay. Next.
On page 8, aid to community colleges, DLS concurs, recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurs.
Okay. Next.
On page 9, this begins the Department of Housing and Community Development. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred. However, there are 2 color page items. The first pertains to supplemental budget number 1, which included federal funds for the Home Ownership Works program. The color page would restrict that funding until the department submits regulations related to implementing Chapter 702 and 703 of 2021. That's the appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance program. And then the DHCD would also have to submit a letter once they submit the regulations.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to reject initial DLS recommendation and adopt the color page.
Okay.
And on page 10, there's another color page item for DHCD. This would restrict funding within the Project Core program for 2 projects, the Solo Gibbs Recreation Center and Cherry Hill redevelopment projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Page 11 is the Department of Environment, PAYGO. DLS recommends concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Okay.
All right, that's it.
Is there a motion to move this? So move. Is there a second? Okay. All in favor? Any opposition? Great. Congratulations, everyone. We just moved out hundreds of millions of dollars in cash to fund important projects. With that, that concludes today's decisions. We're going to take a little bit of a break just so the computer can update, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes or so we can move on to capital budget hearings. With that, we're adjourned for now. Hey, everybody. I appreciate your patience. Obviously, busy time of session, and I know that your schedules are busy, so I appreciate your patience. Just want to welcome everyone to Capital Budget Subcommittee, where we're meeting for the day today for the purpose of capital budget hearing on budgets. I just want to go over the order real quick. So we're going to start with the Maryland School for the Deaf. And then we're just going to go in the order that you should have: Judiciary, Department of Health, Department of Public Safety, University System of Maryland, Maryland Higher Education Commission, University of Maryland Medical System, and then Department of Juvenile Services. So we will start first with the Maryland School for the Deaf, and we will start with the analysis by Laura Hyde, and then we'll have the agency response. Ms. Hyde.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, for the record, my name is Laura Hyde. I'm the budget analyst for Capital Maryland School for the Deaf. We're starting on page 1 with the capital budget summary. In fiscal 2023, the Veddets building renovation on the Frederick campus receives $9.5 million in general obligation bonds, and the high and middle school residences receives $900,000 in fiscal 24, which expected costs through calendar 2030 of approximately $30 million. At the bottom of page 1, you can see the GO bond recommended actions, which includes approval of the deauthorization of $400,000 in bond funding for the fire alarm system on the Frederick campus, and approval of the Veddets building funds mentioned previously. Turning to page 3, this is the Veddets building renovation. The Veddets building renovation includes 2 floors for career technology education program classrooms, replacement of outdated and failing building systems, and upgrades to bring the building into code with the Americans for Disabilities Act compliance. In fiscal 2018, this project had an initial projected cost of $13.4 million, and in the 2023 CIP, the 50% project cost is anticipated at $15.5 million. And for that reason, the Department of Legislative Services is concerned that the current design cost estimate may be low. And so accordingly, DLS recommends that the Department of General Services provide an updated cost estimate based on the 100% construction design. On page 4, this is a description of Maryland School for the Deaf's out-year project, which is the high school and middle school residences. The CIP provides state funding beginning in fiscal 2024 to construct a new high school and middle school residence, which will contain a satellite health center, central offices, and a new student center at the Frederick campus. The project includes ADA and fire code deficiencies, allowances for proper student supervision, and a more home-like environment for students. The estimated total cost of this project is $30 million with a project completion date of June 2030. If you please turn to page 5, this is Maryland School for the Deaf enrollment. For the 2021-2022 school year, MSD's total enrollment is 533 students, which includes 51 enhanced services students, 69 early intervention students, and 413 school-age students. Enrollment has been slightly lower during the COVID-19 pandemic, as some families chose to homeschool their children for safety reasons, or others moved to schools due to difficulty with virtual learning. At the bottom of page 5, you can see the operating budget impact statement, which notes that for the Veddets building renovation, they anticipate an operating budget cost of approximately $250,000 for temporarily modular classrooms. The remainder of the analysis contains updates on the emergency notification system and the deauthorization that I mentioned previously. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Hyde? All right, seeing no questions, we'll now turn to the agency. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Yost Ortiz. I am the interim chief educational officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for seeing us. I am Ann Miller, and I am the Chief Financial Officer and the Chief of Operations at the Maryland School for the Deaf. We appreciate your support for funding to renovate the Frederick Campus Viditz Building. The Department of Legislative Services has made the recommendation that Department of General Services update the cost. We do not have the 100% cost documents yet, but over the weekend, the Department of General Services was able to say it would be probably right around 11 million due to all the fluctuations that are occurring at the moment. So we concur with the recommendation of the legislative analyst.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions. Thank you very much for coming in today. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Committee members, we're now going to turn to the judiciary. Caleb Wise, always good to see you.
See you.
Okay, please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Starting here on page 1 of the capital analysis for the judiciary, as you can see in fiscal 2023, the total general obligation bonds authorized are 42.585 million. 25.8 million of this goes towards the Shulman Building conversion project. 3.95 of this will go towards the Washington County District Court renovation and expansion. 12 million of this is for the new Hartford County District Court building, and 0.83 million is for the new Courts of Appeals building. Moving on to the general obligation bond recommended actions. DLS recommends approving the general obligation bond funding for all of the projects, as you can see here, 1 through 4. Additionally, DLS recommends approving the amendment for the Washington County District Court project to include both renovation and the expansion of the existing facility. And number 6 here, DLS recommends approving the pre-authorization of $35.7 million in general obligation bond funding for the Shulman Building conversion in fiscal 2024. Moving on to exhibit number 1. Here is the Judiciary 2022 CIP, or Capital Improvement Program. As you can see in fiscal 2023, the Shulman Building conversion project and the new Hartford County District Court building are the 2 largest projects in terms of the amount of funding that they received. In the next year, fiscal 2024, the Shulman Building conversion project remains the largest project. However, the new Courts of Appeals building starts as the second largest. In the out years of the forecast, 2025 through 2027, as you can see, the new Courts of Appeals building and the new Hartford County District Court building are the 2 projects that, as of right now, comprise the majority of that spending. Moving on to Exhibit 2 and the Shulman Building conversion project. Here is a comparison between the the 2018 and the 2022 capital improvement programs. As you can see, the capital improvement program in 2018 indicated that the project for the Shulman Building conversion was initially scheduled to start receiving funding in 2019 and was supposed to finish funding in 2022. Due to continual delays in this project, as well as increase in the cost, you can see that in the 2022 CIP, the project is not, will continue to receive funding through 2024, and here in the sidebar, the cost of the project has over doubled in the intervening years between these 2 CIPs. Moving on to the renovation and expansion of the Washington County District Court. This project will renovate the existing courthouse and add a third courtroom with associated judicial chambers and offices space for court support staff. This project was expanded in scope, was initiated by when the state provided $1.3 million in general funds in fiscal 2022 and supplemental budget to fund a series of facility renewal projects within the existing structure. The expanded scope forms the basis for the $3.5 million in general obligation bonds budgeted in fiscal 2023, which was not planned in the previous capital improvement program. Excluding the fiscal 2022 supplemental project funding, the project is estimated to cost $9.55 million based on an estimate provided by the design team in November of 2021. Moving on to the same page, the Harford County District Court building. This project is to replace the existing Harford County District Court. The budget provides $12 million in general obligation bond funds to acquire 8 acres of land for this project, which is $8.4 million higher than the previously planned amount, reflecting a new Department of General Services estimate of the cost available for sites in Bel Air. The final project is the new Courts of Appeals building. This project will construct a new Court of Appeals facility to replace the existing one. The site selected is a state-owned parcel of land located adjacent to the current district court facility in Annapolis. The budget includes $830,000 in general obligation bond funds to continue the planning phase of this project. Additional funding of $119.1 million is needed to complete the project. Additionally, the fiscal 2022 budget included a pre-authorization of $30 million in fiscal 2023 for the construction phase of this project. However, the project schedule indicates that the construction funds are not needed until fiscal 2024. That ends my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that analysis. Are there any questions for Mr. Wise? Seeing not, thank you very much. We're very pleased to have the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, Chief Judge Getty, and Chief Judge of the District Court, Judge Morrissey. Always good to see you. Welcome back, Chief Judge. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We also have State Court Administrator Pamela Harris with us to answer any questions. However, we've provided a 2-page written response in which we concur with all the Department of Legislative Services recommendations. And so we have no further testimony unless you have questions.
Chief Judge, it seems like you've done this before. Any questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we will now move on to the Department of Health. Andrew Garrison. Mr. Garrison, good to see you. Start whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, member of this committee. We have the Maryland Department of Health Capital Program in front of you today. And this marks the introduction of the Facilities Master Plan and the first funding that we see to that. So we're going to be spending a lot of our time discussing the Longway Facilities Master Plan. We do only have one project related to that receives funding in the current CIP. Those are these behavioral health crisis centers that you see in the center of your screen here. We also have some out-year funding for the decommissioning of state buildings. And then also there's a continued funding for the Perkins project that has been with this capital program for some time now. And that's actually our first item of discussion is some of the delays that we're seeing with the Perkins renovation here in Exhibit 1. In the calendar 2021 was in September of 2021, there was an award for the architectural engineering project finally, even though funding was originally authorized in fiscals 19. And so we do have an opportunity for the department to comment on some of those delays, particularly in getting those design plans ready to go for this renovation. As you see, these delays have continued to push funding out into fiscal 2025 with costs also increasing. In terms of the master plan, as I mentioned, the only funding that we have associated currently is for the behavioral health crisis centers that the department has, and they'll be building 4 of those ultimately. In Exhibit 2 here, we've shown you the phases in which they're hoping to be building those, starting with a facility on Western Maryland, and continuing with facilities in the Eastern Shore, and then Central and Southern Maryland. The other item in the facilities master plan contained a lot of discussion around the evaluation of the current facilities. And so what we have in Exhibit 3 is the result, is a summary of the results of those evaluations. As you can see, there were 3 current state hospital facilities that were evaluated for a poor current building structure. Those are the 2 chronic care hospitals, Deerside in Western Maryland, as well as Spring Grove Hospital Centers. You may also recall from this plan that those are facilities that are ultimately going to be having services transitioned away from them. The department also evaluated the bed needs throughout the state over the course of their master plan, which goes through fiscal 2024, or 2040. And one interesting thing here is the bed need anticipated at Spring Grove Hospital Center is actually projected to increase over the period of the plan, although this is one of those facilities that the department has said that they are planning to close, which seems to run counter from their own analysis here. Additionally, the department has also projected that a significant share of DDA residents will ultimately be treated in the community, and that's why we are showing a significant decrease in bed use for those facilities for Holly and Potomac Center. And then lastly, of course, the facilities at the chronic care hospitals are also projected to have a decrease in ultimate bed need. But given that the recommendation from the department is to ultimately transition services away from Spring Grove, however, they are identifying an increase in bed need for that facility in particular. We're asking the department to comment on the sort of that discrepancy there, given that this is a facility that's recommended for having those services transitioned away. The other item I would like to briefly highlight is, as I mentioned, the facilities master plan also discusses a lot of the DDA facilities. I also have ultimately having their patients pushed out into the community beds. But the grant program, as it's currently structured for the department throughout the CIP, is relatively level funded. And so we would anticipate more community needs being outlined through those community grant programs to further support those. And so we're also asking the department to comment on alignment within the grant program that they fund through this capital budget with the facilities master plan and perhaps more community bed needs. This capital program also does include the capital grants and loan program, which is the Community Health Facilities Grant Program and an FQHC one. Ultimately, DLS is recommending approving all of this funding in addition to the funding for the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Centers. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Well done. Any questions? Okay. Oh, Senator Alfrith, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. How did they get to the bed need analysis? Did they look kind of holistically at the bed need across the state, or just, and then use that data to inform bed need at these facilities, or do we know how they got there?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And there's, I'm sure we have folks from the department here who could comment more broadly, but part of this evaluation that they did looked at projected change in population throughout the state, number of beds that exist privately, and how those services might interact, which is kind of how they also got to that number from the DD side of, hopefully that ultimately the projection was that services were going to increase for this population, however, that the state's component of that was actually going to be reduced, given perhaps some of those shifts there. Okay. So that is, it kind of varied based on which facility they were looking at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll now turn it over to the agency. Secretary Schrader, if you want to bring over your team. Secretary Schrader, good to see you. Sorry I missed you this morning. I had a good talk with your staff, but wanted to just touch base with you and thank you for your help on the autism waiver stuff. But anyway,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I missed you this morning, and I appreciated the feedback. That issue is one of our major concerns, so I appreciate the feedback. Chairman Zucker and members of the subcommittee, for the record, my name is Dennis Schrader, Health Secretary, and with me at the table is Will Andolaro, our Director of Facilities Management Development. We also have our CFO, Amy Lee Brandenburg, Nick Napolitano, Allison Berry, and Webster Yee available for questions if needed from the committee. We released our MDH Facilities Master Plan this past fall. That was, which is a 3-phase, 20-year plan that aligns with the Department of Health's projected patient care needs with healthcare services offered or provided by the department. To be honest with you, this is very exciting because 5-6 years ago, when we first started looking at this problem in 2017, we really did not have a capital plan for a very large department and agency. And we very deliberately moved through this process. And we realized in 2017 that many of our facilities, including Spring Grove and Western Maryland Hospital Center, are in poor condition and would be very difficult, if impossible, to modernize. The current and future employees and the Marylanders they care for at these facilities deserve a better environment. Let me give you an example of one positive change we've made through this process. In 2018 and 19, we moved the Office of Healthcare Quality from an 1800s building on Spring Grove, which had many environmental issues and concerns by the staff. We moved them out to a modern office building in Columbia, and that move has been enormously helpful as a recruitment and retention incentive, which is part of the challenge here. Staff want to be in a modern environment. Over the next 20 years, we also anticipate in this plan over $100 million of investment in facility life extension for those facilities that are adaptable. So we're looking at the Holly Center in Salisbury, Perkins, we're investing in, and Springfield Hospital, just to name a couple. And the plan enables us to begin the process of divesting facilities that no longer are operating. So we're not paying to mow the grass at a facility using health dollars that are better spent on other direct care to our patients. And possibly, and we're going to be looking at existing capacity inside of Central Maryland. We will build some new state-of-the-art facilities. And we want to really focus on our evolving model of behavioral health care by starting to build crisis centers in each region of the state. Smaller access, and this is all part of the concept of diverting people out of the criminal justice system into behavioral health care, in the community. Phase one, which will occur from 2022 to 2026, as I mentioned, it involves divesting 3 closed facilities, one at Crownsville in Anne Arundel County, the Regional Institute for Children and Adolescents in Southern Maryland and Prince George's County, and Upper Shore Community Mental Health Center in Kent County. And planning for Spring Grove Hospital will start. This phase includes planning and construction also of the 4 regional crisis centers I mentioned. Phase 2 will be from 2027 to 2032 and is focused on constructing a new facility for children and a secure evaluation therapeutic facility in the Central Maryland region. And we also want to construct a replacement patient facility at Springfield Hospital Center in Sykesville. The last phase will occur from 2032 to 41 and is projected to include renovating the Holly Center, integrating MDH facilities patients with community providers, and developing strategic partnerships to transition services that are currently provided at the Potomac Center. And then finally, to evolve out of the Spring Grove Hospital Center, as we've mentioned. Our goal through this ongoing process is to finalize a capital program that guides us through the rejuvenation of our facilities. Importantly, it is a planning document that will evolve over the 20 years it covers. And I'll also say that our objective was to have a very public conversation about this. This has not been talked about in committees, and we want you to have input into this before we start moving forward. So it's a very exciting day. This is the beginning of a conversation, and hopefully it will take year over year as we make proposals for additional capital investment. But we wanted to make sure that this public document was in the hands of the legislature so that we can start talking about these things in a public way. I will now turn it over to Will Andalara, our Director of Facilities Management Development, and he'll briefly summarize our written responses, and we're happy to take questions afterwards. And I should have also thanked the analysts who did a very good job at reviewing our plan. So, Will?
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman Zucker and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Will Andalora. I'm the Director of the Office of Facilities Management and Development for the Department of Health. We have submitted a detailed response for your review, and I will be providing a summary for each response. Regarding question 1 and the delay in the AE contract for the Clifton T. Perkins Hospital Center, MDH had to update the Part 1 and Part 2 program of requirements before the contract solicitation could occur. The project was delayed by 18 months as a result of the pandemic. The project is now in design and with scheduled completion for 2025. Regarding question 2 and what steps will be taken to ensure that there is adequate capacity to support implementation of the facilities master plan, MDH is working with the Maryland Healthcare Commission and the Health Services Cost Review Commission to identify excess capacity to support the implementation of the facilities master plan. Regarding question 3 and the impact of the facilities master plan on the Maryland Department of Health workforce, the development of the facilities master plan was a 3-year process that was submitted in September of 2021, which included an 18-month interruption due to the pandemic. The department believes that implementation of the master plan, including the planned modernization of facilities, will improve employee recruitment and retention of staff at MDH facilities. Regarding question number 4 and the alignment of grant programs to support the planned shift to community providers, MDH continually works to engage community providers and to increase interest in MDH-sponsored grant programs. And we will continue to evaluate the need to adjust funding levels to support the implementation of the master plan. Mr. Secretary, I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we are available for your questions.
Thank you very much. Senator King.
Thank you. Welcome, Secretary Schrader. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Senator.
I have gotten some correspondence lately from a couple of different groups talking about the capacity issues for people with mental health issues and people with long-term care issues. How big of a problem is that? Do we have any idea how many mental health people are waiting to get into a facility? Is there a waiting list? I'm just trying to figure out how big the problem is from what I've heard.
Great question, Senator. Let me break it into pieces. We do have the forensics population, and we work very closely with the judiciary on that issue, and you might hear from attorneys who are concerned about access. And I could go deeper into that. We actually had a period where we agreed, and the legislature passed a bill 3 years ago to have a 10-day cycle time for admission into our hospitals. And that we were meeting that until the pandemic, unfortunately. It has gone up, but we are in daily contact with the judiciary, and we're making good progress. The backlog is coming down again. We're about 50. So that's one issue. The other issue is we really need more community-based care for crisis. That's why we've put that in the master plan. We feel that there's a need for not just what the state would build, but others. And we're encouraging crisis capacity. I think that is really a big problem. And then we're also looking at hard-to-place individuals in hospitals that seem to be stuck in hospitals. And we're looking at the rates that we pay in Medicaid for some of those patients, because community providers are willing to take folks who maybe are at a base level, but when it comes to the hard to manage, our rates aren't appropriate for them because they can't bring the staff to bear. So there's 3 or 4 different issues involved here. And then the last thing is there is concern about children and parents in the community having access to care on the private side. We have a really robust public behavioral health system, but private citizens sometimes find difficulty. So those are 4 areas that I think are very legitimate. And there was a question asked earlier by Senator Elfreth. And I've done master planning before for many years on the private sector side with the University of Maryland Medical System. What we did then and what we've done in this plan is we brought in a consultant who had clinical capability. So we had clinicians looking first at what the clinical requirements are, digested those, and then, so we didn't just hire an architect to come in and say, here's some pretty buildings. We really were focused on the clinical requirements first.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Elfrith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Secretary. That needs assessment, I think, is critical for our understanding of not just the hospital system, but as you mentioned, community and behavioral health. Is it possible for the committee to see that needs assessment?
Yeah, we can bring back some of that data. We'll, get it together so you can see the kind of information that we use to make the assessment. And it's evolving, of course. It's a snapshot in time. But the thing I'm so proud of about this is that we want to have this conversation with the legislature.
Yeah.
And we've got to project what we think. Now, that doesn't mean everything we put in the plan is what we're going to build. It's going to change and shift with different administrations, with different ideas. But the important thing is that we're calling it like we see it.
Absolutely. I commend you for doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Rickard.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all the good work on the master facilities plan, but I'm just wondering, we're at a little different point right now than I've ever seen before. I just got a text this morning that one of our community providers has more and more of their existing clinicians who are retiring. A, they're aging out, and B, folks are burnout. And they were expressing risk because they're about to open a crisis program, but they can't get the professionals to do that. My concern is that the delivery system has to have a good balance of clinicians and caregivers in the facilities. But then if we want to continue to do population health and maintain folks in the community, you have to have that robust delivery system to be able to provide the milieu in the community, to be able to maintain people in the community. So I'm just wondering if there needs to be an update, or maybe you've already done it, on addressing the workforce. Because if we don't have the workforce, people will then wind up waiting longer. They'll wind up going back into the facilities, and the pendulum will begin to swing the other way. So are you thinking about that, or in a position to do some assessment on that?
Yes, I mean, the workforce has clearly emerged as a key issue. We're trying to figure out exactly how to approach that issue. Obviously, it's different than the master plan, which is capital investment in buildings. But it's clearly an issue, and we are having those conversations internally.
Yeah, thank you. And I realize that, it is more operational, but my concern is we're just going to have to think about that going forward, because you can't continue to close facilities when you have more folks at risk in the community. So,
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, no, and the idea here is the theme that's weaved through here is definitely, the closures are long overdue from, 30 years ago, and we're trying to get those off the books. What we are doing also, though, is taking the first step by, for example, with the crisis centers. That's a much more appropriate place to take care of some of the individuals in the community. And if we start to stake out territory around the state in regions, we believe that will begin a process of the commitment to that kind of care.
Yes, thank you very much. I know you've worked long and hard, and this has been a discussion we've had for years on upgrading those facilities. So I think you're on the right track. I'm just worried right now about where we are, but we have time, because that's a longer range project.
Right.
That we'll be able to see if it stabilizes, but.
And one of the things we've had to do, and this is Will and his team, and I got to thank DGS for their help. We had to educate, and DBM also, we had to educate ourselves on how does the state's capital process come together. we had to have a master plan to start moving ahead.
Correct.
We're asking for our first increments of money this year on a very small scale, and then as we get more proficient at this, we'll be able to ask for more over the next several years, but this is laying the groundwork.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Colleagues, we do have some public testimony. I just remind everybody that it's very good that we have public testimony, just reminding everyone that who's testifying today that we're going to stay consistent with what full committee does, so 2.5 minutes for each person. So we'll call up Denise Gilmore, Carrie Elliott, and Miriam Doyle. Do you want to come on up? And please feel free to start in any order you wish. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm Field Director with AFSCME Council 3. It's a delight to be able to be testifying on a capital budget today, which we usually don't do. But we are testifying in opposition to this facility master plan. You know, we welcome the discussion on infrastructure for the state hospitals. Certainly, we agree it's overdue. But what this budget does is it starts to implement that plan by putting in money for the planning and design of these regional treatment centers. At this point, we still don't know what the bed capacity of these regional treatment centers is going to be. Nothing in the facility plan addressed that. There was one sentence, we appreciate the analysts' thorough work, there was one sentence on page 5 of the analysis that alludes to these regional treatment centers being privately run, even though the state's going to pay for them to be built. But again, we don't have all the full information on that. In a nutshell, you know, our position, certainly the lived experiences of our members, is that this facility plan, we currently have about 1,400 budgeted beds in the 11 facilities that it covers. We have 1,800 licensed beds in the facilities that it covers. In 20 years, it privatizes 5 hospitals in the system for a combined 850 licensed beds. We don't think that the solution to the current crises that we have on substance abuse disorder, on mental health, is to reduce the bed capacity that MDH has. We support building regional treatment centers. We certainly think they should be state-run, but they shouldn't supplant the beds that we currently have within MDH. We can't afford it. They're at 100% capacity. At Deerhead, we're hearing that they had 1,200 applications for admissions last year that were all denied because we've been intentionally stopping admissions there for several years with a plan to eventually privatize it. Patients don't receive the same level of care in the community that they can here in our state facilities. They're here because the community oftentimes has denied them. State beds can't discriminate. They take everybody. You know, they're here because in many options there aren't any other options for them to go. They need 24/7 care that our facilities and these beds can provide. So we would appreciate your support in putting the brakes on what we think is a pretty detrimental plan to patient care in the long term here in Maryland. We do have a member, Carrie Elliott, who works at one of these facilities that's slated to close in phase 1 of the plan, but we appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Elliott.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Elliott. I work at Deerhead Hospital Center in Salisbury, Maryland as a geriatric nursing assistant. I have been there for over 10 years. I am here today even though I worked an overnight shift so that I could talk about my facility and the love of my love of my residents that I care for. My residents would not fare well at another private sector facility. They are a very vulnerable population, which I deal with dementia. Dementia people cannot be moved. Once they're established, they do not cope well moving to another facility. We provide excellent care to these people, and other facilities do not, because they will take their staff and only have one person for 40 residents. That is not kosher with dementia people. And also during this last 2 years, my staff, including me, and the nursing staff, the administration staff has become their family, considering a lot of their family was not able to come in to see them. So I am requesting that you reject the master plan that would close my facility and the other facilities that are in the master plan, because this is causing a problem with recruiting and retaining staff. Nobody wants to come to work for a facility that is stated to close in the next 5 years, and my coworkers are worried that they won't have a job that offers the benefits that a state employment does. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So if you were assured by the administration that you would have a job if there was a transfer, would that make you feel better?
Yes, and some of them, they want to know about how far away they would have to go.
That's all very, very fair.
Mr. Chair, if I can just answer that question on a technical basis. The way that the layoff and pen abolishment statutes in the state work is that if a Department of Health employee gets laid off or abolished, they can only go into a position that's within that same county. I would just add that that would be Holly Center, but Holly Center is also slated to close and privatize as part of this. So we are concerned about, the long-term employment prospects for these employees,
well,
even under that.
I'm sure this subcommittee would be happy to huddle with the administration and see what we can figure out. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time to come and testify. Any questions? Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next agency, Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. We'll start off with Jacob Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me pull up the analysis. All right, so for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the total funds for fiscal 2023 that are recommended in the CIP are $47.6 million. These are for 3 projects currently in that first fiscal year. However, the overall list of projects is found here on page 6. There are 3 specialty housing units in the CIP. The first is the Therapeutic Treatment Center, which is a total of $466 million. There's also 2 housing units which are split out from pre-existing projects. Those 2 facilities will be in the Western region and in the Central Jessup region. There's also 5 security and facility improvement projects across the state, including perimeter security systems, as well as steam tunnels, electrical infrastructure, and a building facade that is failing, as well as 1 project for a MCE textiles and graphics shop expansion in Jessup. The recommended actions, in short, are to approve all of the approve all of the authorizations and 2 pre-authorizations. However, we'll be going into the details of each project in just a moment. To give a background on the population changes this year, Exhibit 1 shows the decline that we saw from 2020 to 2021. There's the largest decline on record for overall DPSCS population, and the number of arrestees processed also declined substantially. And those numbers are summarized in Exhibit 2. The average daily population in Baltimore City, which has been some of the tightest, most crowded facilities, is also on the decline as of January of 2022. And I'll also note that offenders that were previously held in Jessup have been returned to Baltimore City. So there is less need for increased space in Baltimore City as a result of operational changes. The Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance is the DPSCS unit responsible for carrying out these projects, and the Department of General Services now carries out projects over $200,000. I will note that for the DCCFM, there's 65% vacancies currently, which is certainly impacting the ability of DPSCS to carry out the projects that I'm about to go over. A lot of these projects are repairing aging buildings and infrastructure. DPSCS has some of the most facilities, physical plant spaces in the state. This is not just being renovated through the CIP. There's also operating funds as well as funds in the dedicated purpose account. which, as well as the DGS Renewals Fund. And there's also availability in the dedicated purpose account to include DPSCS projects. There's a large backlog of projects which are not accounted for in any of the current budgets. So this is something to maintain track of and ensure that DPSCS is following through on these projects. Also, before I get started, wanted to mention that there's the Women's Pre-Release Center, which is required by statute to be built and operated by June 2024. There is $150,000 in the operating budget for this, which will start planning for the project. DLS is expecting that this would be promoted to a full capital project in the next CIP. Funding has shifted slightly from previous plans for fiscal 2023. There's been project delays in the perimeter security project, the building facade project, and the Jessup Regional Infirmary. There's 2 new projects that were made out of previous projects, like I mentioned, the ADA housing units in Jessup and in the Western Maryland region. But the largest project that DPSCS is engaging in is the Therapeutic Treatment Center. This has been in the works for a while now, a plan to replace the Baltimore City Jail. The current bed count estimate is 804 beds, which will be split up between new medical beds, which is the Therapeutic Treatment Center, and then renovated beds at the Jail Industries Building, which will be incorporated into the Therapeutic Treatment Center. Exhibit 4 demonstrates the changes since the 2020 CIP, which is when this first received planning funding. It was not included in the 2021 CIP as planning funding was sufficient, but currently the plans have shifted significantly. As I mentioned, there's been a decrease in the scope of beds, as well as some of those are now renovated beds rather than new beds. But there is still a large total cost increase that we see of about $150 million. There's also a cost per gross square feet increase, a substantial 56% increase in that estimate, which DPSCS and DGS should provide more details to justify, because it does not seem like this is a accurate or, it seems like this should be thought out more. The proposed schedule is listed here at the bottom of the page, and if completed at the current schedule, will be open for fiscal 2028. We're asking DPSCS to provide a justification for renovating the Jail Industries Building as part of the project scope, as well as the 56% increase in the total contract cost. The second project that's funded in fiscal 2023 is replacing the high-temperature hot water system at the Easton Correctional Institution. Exhibit 5 demonstrates how this project has changed since introduced in the 2016 CIP to the 2020 and the current CIP. The scope was increased for the 2020 CIP, but the costs continue to increase in this CIP despite having the same scope. This primarily is accounted for by the increased cost of metals, which have increased by about double. And the third project that will be funded in fiscal 2023 is the Jessup Regional Electrical Infrastructure Upgrade. This is serving over 6 correctional facilities in the region. They're out of date and it requires replacement. It's also been delayed. It was introduced in the 2016 CIP with a completion date of February of 2020, but now in the 2022 CIP, that completion date has been pushed to 2024. The cost has also increased substantially in that time period, and DPSCS should provide more justification for that. For out-year projects, there's a large project that will replace perimeter security systems across the state in 10 facilities. The project is delayed for the second consecutive year, so that's, it's something to keep track of. The Jessup Regional Infirmary is also a project that is in the out years. There has been a scope change. Part of this project was broken out, the ADA housing unit. However, the overall cost has stayed the same. So now there are 2 projects whereas there used to be just one, and there's no clear indication that the scope increase is necessary. So we're asking DPSCS to provide that justification. Especially with the recently incarcerated population decline, it's not clear we need more beds. And I already mentioned most of these projects, so I'm not going to spend any more time. Actually, that concludes my my remarks. Here are the recommended actions, and I stand ready for questions.
Well, thank you very much for that analysis. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll now turn to Secretary Green. Come on up with your team and welcome.
Thank you.
Begin whenever you're ready.
Very good. Good afternoon, good evening at this moment. Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, members of the Senate and Capital Budget Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Robert Green. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is our Deputy Secretary of Operations, Wayne Hill, Mr. John Gauthier, our Acting Director of Capital Construction, as well as Rachel Sess, our Chief of Staff. I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Cash for his analysis of this budget. You should have before you a 3-page response to the questions as proposed. The analysis contains 4 recommended actions, and the agency concurs with all 4 of those recommended actions. We would be pleased to answer any of your questions.
Senator, very well. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, good to see you. I'm going to respectfully express frustration with the timeline of the Women's Pre-Release Center. Can you give some background as to kind of the last few years and some better understanding of how quickly you can turn that project around, since it is a priority of the General Assembly?
Certainly. If I may ask Chief Sessa to give us the most up-to-date information on that at this moment.
Good afternoon, Senator, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, members of the subcommittee. My name is Rachel Sessa. For the record, I'm the Chief of Staff of the department. Greatly appreciate that question. Senate Bill 684, which required the agency to build a standalone pre-release facility for women, was passed in the 2020 legislative session. That bill was vetoed by the administration. That veto was overridden during the 2021 legislative session. So the first opportunity the agency had to request funding would be for the FY23 budget. We submitted that budget request in the fall of last year. That as indicated by the analysis, that funding for $150,000 was included in the FY23 operating budget, and that initiates the Part 1 phase of the Capital Improvement Plan project, which is in accordance with the capital programming process. In addition, the agency submitted a statutorily mandated report outlining the status of this project, and it is my understanding that the Senate Public Safety, Transportation, and the Environment Subcommittee actually adopted a narrative today restricting that $150,000 for specifically that capital programming use, which was exactly how we intend on using it.
Okay, can you give us a little, what can we anticipate the timeline moving forward? And again, I know maybe because of the veto and the override, you can't achieve the mandated timeline of opening of that facility, but what does this look like moving forward?
Thank you, Senator, for that follow-up question. And I think that in the DLS analysis, there is a little bit of additional information regarding the time frame and some of the concerns as it relates to the statutorily mandated provisions within the legislation and the ability for the agency to actually come into compliance. And so as I understand it, and I would certainly defer to Acting Director Gauthier on our team, but as I understand it, as we know that the funding is moving through the budget for that $150,000, we submit either a request for proposals to bring on a project manager or a consultant to help us with the design phase of the actual program, again, that Part 1 program, or alternatively, we can work with the Department of General Services and utilize their existing contractors and go that process as well. So as soon as we know that funding is moving through the budget, we'll seek and contract with a program project manager who will help us with that design Project 1. And again, that information is reflected in that report that we submitted to the General Assembly, and I'd be happy to share a copy with you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I feel like I still am not getting the answer I'm asking for, which is, when do you expect perhaps a shovel in the ground and a door to be opened?
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate that. And if I may ask the Acting Director Gauthier in terms of the Capital Improvement Plan program progress and how that kind of CIP, I think we project out a number of years in terms of that program. So I think it's, we anticipate it to take about 3 to 4 years, but if I may.
No, you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
From program development into design and shovel in the ground, it's 3 to 4 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure if any members have questions, they'll follow up with you offline.
Thank you.
We also have some public witnesses that, Mr. Secretary, I hope you'll stay around for to hear. We'll go, if you, three of you want to come up at a time, Nicole Hansen-Mundell, Elena McWilliams, and Matan Zemer, if you're here. Come on up. Matan, why don't you kick us off?
Could I actually defer to Nicole Hansen-Mundell?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And we also have Carlita Brown and Thomas Rojas. So, all right, let's begin. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Zucker, Senator McCray, good to see you again, and honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sams Rojas, and I have the honor of speaking to you today on International Women's Day on behalf of Marion House and the women we serve. Marion House was opened 40 years ago to serve women leaving incarceration because our founders recognized that they were not well equipped to transition back to the community, as previously incarcerated women were returning without resources and support to gain employment, housing, and other much-needed services for successful reintegration. We serve women who have been incarcerated from anywhere from 6 months to 20, 30, 40 years in prison. So in our years of working with this population, we've seen time and time again that women being released from incarceration need comprehensive services that address employment, education, mental health, and housing assistance to help build a solid foundation for their life after release. These women are mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, neighbors, citizens of our community, and they deserve our support. That's why we're a part of the Women's Pre-Release Equity Coalition, fighting year after year to pass this bill, override the veto, and now to ensure that there is an accountability and follow-through with this project. We're requesting the subcommittee to allocate $2 million for the Women's Pre-Release Center in the DPSCS capital budget. Today, you're going to hear from one of our residents, Carlita, about challenges she faced and how her pre-release center could have better prepared her for reentry. We're grateful to be able to share her story with you today. And as you listen to her, I also want to remind you that Carlita's story, while her own, is not alone. She's not the only one. There are many others like Carlita, some who have a place like ours to come to, but many others who don't have anywhere to go and are left to navigate complex systems on their own. Successful reentry programs give former offenders opportunities to support themselves and begin rebuilding their lives, helping reduce recidivism and improve public safety. Maryland's incarcerated women have been waiting for too long. They deserve equitable services, and they deserve it now. We respectfully request your support in ensuring that this happens by allocating $2 million for the Women's Pre-Release Center so that this project can begin. Thank you for your time, and I'd now like to introduce Carlita to share her story.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. As she said, my name is Carlita. After serving 22 years in Maryland's prison, I was released from a maximum security prison. Even today, as I sit before you, psychologically, I still have my struggles and emotionally adjusting in a world that is so foreign. I believe that had I had the assistance of being exposed in a different environment to transition into a society that is foreign to me, I spent more time in prison than I did in society. I say that to say, when you are released and you're released into a predicament that you know nothing about and you're not prepared, it is stress built on top of stress and nerve built on top of nerve. And so we have, even like Ms. Psalms expressed, the Marion House. The Marion House has a great mission. However, that mission doesn't cater to women who serve long-term in a prison. Most of its mission is geared towards substance abuse. Well, I don't have a substance abuse problem, but I am in recovery. It takes a lot of work to recover and being in an environment that is non-conducive to a woman who wants to develop into a healthy sense of self. Although I do have a great support system and I'm grateful, I know that I would not have as much of the struggles that I have had I transitioned in a healthy way. Pre-release is what have a mission that is geared towards helping just that, women transition into society. The more time we wait, the more time we waste in helping the very people we want to rehabilitate, whose behavior we want to correct. We have to take people out of certain environments for them to develop and grow and learn something different and to expose them to something different. I came home and got scared to death because nobody told me that the buses talk. I was scared to death. I had to call somebody like, come get me. Really, I almost had a nervous breakdown because nobody prepared me for that. Had I had a pre-release center, pre-release helps you to develop. They walk you step by step. I didn't have that. But right now, so now I'm learning, and I'm just grateful that I'm put in a position where I can help women in my position to look forward to all these talking machines that are out here in the world. But thanks for letting me share. I hope I said something that was insightful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for hearing our testimony and for all the conversations we've had offline as well. My name is Matan Zemmer. I'm a community organizer with Jews United for Justice, which organizes over 6,000 Jews and allies across the state. In alignment with our partners here, we've been involved with the Women's Pre-Release Coalition for the last several years, fighting for this legislation, which is now law, and now fighting for that law to be implemented as it's written. So a couple things that I just want to highlight. You have our written testimony, so I won't reiterate what's in there, but I just want to highlight a couple points based on what you've heard today. There's been years of folks fighting for this legislation. Obviously, you've heard the passion about why it's so critical, and that is based on evidence as well from across the country as well, and what pre-release services means for women, especially returning, and in our state where we've had no pre-release services for women for years. That's sort of like a built-up inequity that we're having to remedy now. We thought that passing this legislation was going to be the fix, and here we are continuing to fight for its implementation, and we will continue to fight until we see it realized. The couple things that we did see were that over the years we've heard numerous reasons for delays and excuses, and one of the things that we actually saw is that there was $1.5 million included for the initial stages of this when the bill initially passed. That didn't get used, and so it got returned to the general fund. So we still have questions about what happened there, why that wasn't used, and now why what you're hearing is this $150,000, why that's so much lower than the initial $1.5 million. So we're grateful that that $150 now is going to move forward, but we know that we need more. We need the $2 million allocated in the capital budget to get the planning phase up and running, to get the design process going, and so that this can't be used, the budget can't be used as another reason for delay. And so whether that's for this coming year or the following year, the money has to be there so that this moves forward. Women can't continue to wait for this to happen. And actually, you heard reference to the recent report that was issued by the department, and so I would definitely encourage you all to look at that, and especially on page 3, where the department highlights that DGS estimates that, like other capital improvement projects, fulfilling their capital requirements of SB 684 will take 3 to 4 years if the operating budget for Part 1 and Part 2 development and capital budget for acquisition, design, and construction is there to support various steps along the way. So I just really want to emphasize that last point, is that the money has to be there for this to move forward, and the department agrees with that in their report as well. So with that, I just want to urge your support of allocating $2 million and appreciate your time considering this.
Thank you very much. Next.
Hello, my name's Elena McWilliams. I'm the Policy and Research Coordinator at Out for Justice. I'm here today to request that you allocate $2 million in capital funds to begin building the legally mandated Women's Pre-Release Center. In addition to the years I have spent at Out for Justice working on this issue, I am also a licensed psychotherapist who has treated women with trauma histories for over a decade. Lastly, I am a researcher who has published multiple peer-reviewed research articles about the lasting negative impacts of criminal record stigma. My research findings have consistently coincided with what we will hear and are hearing from incarcerated women during this hearing. So I'm not going to waste time elaborating on my research today. Listening to and believing the urgency surrounding these women's experiences is most important. I will simply summarize the existing research by saying that women are systematically underserved as they return to their communities from incarceration across the country and here in Maryland. Compared to incarcerated men, incarcerated women were earning less on average prior to arrest, have had less access to diversion programs, are more likely to have experienced prior trauma, are more likely to experience psychological distress while incarcerated, are more likely to be held in a facility far from home, and are far more likely to have left behind dependent children when they were incarcerated. When women are released from incarceration without adequate support surrounding these gender-specific issues, we are setting them up for lasting challenges that far surpass those of their male peers, because they entered the system already carrying a bigger burden. For years, Maryland women have told us over and over again that they lack the support they need for reentry. Repeatedly, we have heard that women already have enough services, and if there are any unmet needs, that they would be too costly to fully address, or that it will take many more years to address those issues, or that there aren't enough incarcerated women in Maryland to warrant urgent and full investment. From this view, how many more women will Maryland need to incarcerate per year for the state to believe that this is an urgent issue worth full investment now? We cannot negotiate the worth of women's lives and dreams in these ways, and also their children's lives and dreams. Please see and listen to the urgent message of the Maryland women and allocate the $2 million necessary to move toward meeting their needs.
Sarah Eckert?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Do you all, how many women are we talking about in this center? Do we have an idea about how many, I mean, you're
So-
recommending a facility and a program, but how many women do we currently have who would qualify for that program?
So I think these numbers are frankly mushy, because there is also a coinciding classification issue. We're hearing from behind the walls that many women who are eligible for pre-release status are not being classified as such. But at latest, when we received a listing of women who were on work release, for instance, maybe on minimum security on work release, and those women who were also on pre-release status, it was around like 130 women at the last time we received a list. But, you know, we got that list a little while ago. A few years ago. And so, but we estimate it's around that number if women are properly classified.
Carlita, do you want to?
Thank you very much. I was just curious, because I didn't remember when we had this discussion before, what the population, the targeted population we were hoping to address.
Yeah, and you'll hear from the Department of Corrections that in terms of classification, they'll say numbers like 20, there's only 20 women classified, right? But if we really address the classification issue, which women are not being properly classified on a regular basis, you will find that that number will increase. If the department actually classifies as women appropriately and regularly, you will see that the number will increase from the 140 to possibly more if those women were properly classified, brought back to the table to see how great they've done, what programs did they qualify for, right, Carlita? If they weren't getting any conflicts, it just kind of depends on the course of that woman's life behind the walls, and because they're not being classified accurately, the numbers are skewed. So,
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's,
Chairman Zucker, Kevin Slayton, how are you?
Good to see
I'm
you.
with the Maryland, good to see you too. Here representing the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. The reoccurring theme and a word we keep hearing from the advocates here before, this has absolutely nothing to do with my testimony, I'm just moved in this direction, is the term urgent. The 90 days for you all is about, if nothing else, the money. And all too often, communities and marginalized folks who are at the bottom, they tend to be fighting for issues. But the reality, if the 90 days is about anything, it's about the money. and the impact that the money has on the lives of people. I've just completed reading a book, Ajumo Alu, entitled Mediocre, and she goes through a litany of issues impacting women, particularly poor women of color, and the challenges that they face. I just think in this particular space in which we find ourselves, and you all as legislators, as you review the fiscal responsibilities of the state, that you would take consideration those who are really trying to reform themselves and really become re-engaged with society. The Maryland Center on Economic Policy, we believe that pre-release centers offer a wide range of opportunities and experiences of wraparound services that are truly needed for women to get back on their feet. And with each and every day that's delayed, again, that term urgent is there. We encourage you all to find it, respectfully ask that you would find the $2 million in this capital budget to help move this project along without any further delay.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Did we get all of you? Did we miss you? Yep, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator, and thank you also, Senator, for asking those questions, because we rarely get participation from committees like this and questioning the department. So we really want to say thank you for at least asking them a question. We really appreciate that. My colleagues have told you about what we need, right? And what I want to come here to tell you about is, if we don't have this, how we cannot afford to ignore women because of the residual effects that it will have on their lives, right? When it comes to women, we face more financial barriers. We know that, right? Decreased job opportunities equals increased need of government assistance. We know having a criminal record will further limit women's job options. We know that there are numerous negative impacts of poverty and of incarcerating mothers. When you think about childhood poverty, negatively impacts children, developmental and outcomes, health outcomes, and educational outcomes. Incarcerating mothers and not preparing them for successful reentry harms our children. It elevates their risk of child arrest and incarceration. You're hearing about babies going to jail all over the city. Well, guess what? Maybe you are not doing what we can possibly do funding-wise to ensure that their mothers are coming home properly prepared. The increase and the risk of living in poverty for children, the increase in behavioral problems. When we talk about mothers who are behind the walls and their children left for whoever to take care of. And lastly, really, there's a shocking cost for foster care due to incarcerating mothers. Maryland is spending an estimate $5.6 million per year to place children of women at MCIW and foster care. That is almost 4 times more than what twice as much as what we're asking you for to even start the project. So you're actually spending more money on the back end, not supporting women coming home from prison, than you are on the front end. Lastly, these numbers are much higher if you consider moms of children in pretrial and local jails, increases in annual cost of foster care since 2011. And I'll end on that note, right? Think about it. You're spending more in foster care, $5.6 million, because our babies do not have the type of women who deserve a good reintegration back into society. So please, this year, Senator, next year, Senator, and the year after that, please make sure that that agency who comes up here year after year, make sure that we are allocating the necessary dollars. And thank you, Senator, for continuously holding them accountable and making them answer your questions, not allowing them to circle around your questions, but answer your questions. Thank you to this committee, the ones who are still left.
Thank you. And just so you know, there's other bill hearings and stuff, so people that aren't here. And also, this is a subcommittee, so there's empty desks. That's because they're not assigned to this subcommittee.
Okay.
But they
It makes me
don't
feel better.
take the issue any less seriously than all of us. But it's interesting now being in person because you can see everything, right? But anyway, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Colleagues, will now turn it over to the University System of Maryland budget. We'll start out with Ms. Baker, Sarah Baker, and then we'll see the chancellor soon. Ms. Baker, thank you.
Let me bring up my-
Begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, let me just bring up the analysis. Okay, so I'm going to start, we're going to be talking about facility renewals at USM. So with Exhibit 1, this shows the renewal backlog by institution. USM categorizes projects either as deferred maintenance or programmatic improvements. Deferred maintenance projects total $2.4 billion, of which electrical and mechanical systems account for about 68% of the total. Programmatic improvements include renovations and remodeling and total $2.2 billion for an overall total renovation cost of $4.6 billion. Exhibit 2 shows a facility condition index by institutions. This index shows the percentage of deferred maintenance spending relative to the replacement cost. This is a relative indicator of the condition of a group of facilities, and when tracked over time shows if conditions are improving or not. When considering only deferred maintenance, UMB has the highest FCI at 23.2%. When looking at total renovation costs, College Park has the highest score of 45.7%. Now, USM has been working through this backlog through various approaches. The first, this is a priority of the Regents and the Chancellor. And as you may know, USM has a policy that sets its target that institutional spending on renewal be equal to 2% of the replacement value of facilities. If not, institutions are to increase expenditures by 0.2% of the replacement value. In addition, USM has developed a methodology for allocating any additional funding for renewal above what is funded with ARBs, in which the replacement value only includes those facilities older than 10 years old, so as to target funding to those with the greatest needs. However, USM's policy was last revised in 2005 and does not reflect current practices. So DLS recommends that the Board of Regents update its facility renewal policy to reflect current practices, specifically those related to state facilities. Exhibit 3 shows each institution's performance in meeting its 2% target from 2019 to 21. It should be noted that due to the pandemic, USN suspended spending requirements on renewal in 20 and 21. So overall, during this time period, College Park is the only institution that has met or exceeded this goal. And you'll note that UMES and Frostburg have made steady progress towards the goal. Exhibit 4 showed changes in institutional spending on renewal from 2019 to 2021. The impact of COVID-19 can be seen with spending on renewal declining almost 12% in 20. While spending in 21 increased, it is still almost $3 million lower than before the pandemic. Exhibit 5 just shows all the sources for funding for renewal projects. And just to note that the institutional spending in 22 will increase as institutions get a better idea of revenues available to spend on renewal projects. Prior to 2020, renewal was mostly funded with institutional funds and $17 million in ARBs. Planned funds were initially programmed in 21, but due to financial impact of COVID, were deferred for later years. And the CIP programs these funds in 24 till 27. Exhibit 6 shows the impact of the CIP on the renovation backlog. Overall projects, these projects will reduce USM's backlog by 6%. The backlog would decline almost by 38% at Bowie and 32% at Towson. Turning to the facility renewal program that funds various projects across the system, the CIP provides $25.3 million in ARBs and $65 million in the dedicated purpose account. As I previously mentioned, the CIP does program a total of $1 million in plant funds from 24 to 27. Initially, when first programmed, the funds to be used were to be the System Office Stabilization Account. And these are the funds are the difference between what is charged to the institutions to cover their portion of the ARB debt service and actual payment. However, system states that all the funds in the account are either committed to debt service or to several capital projects that were internally authorized and approved or being transferred back to the institutions. To the extent that USM is unable to contribute plant funds as the part of the overall facility renewal backlog funding strategy, the Chancellor should comment on whether an increase in annual level of ARB issuance would be a workable solution. In regards to the 65 million in PAYGO funds, USM developed a strategy to allocate additional funds for renewal, provided above the ARB level. The methodology provides incentives for those institutions that have made progress towards spending on renewals. So funding is either considered Tier 1, which is base funding, or Tier 2, which is additional funding, and this methodology is described on page 11, 10, and 11. However, as I previously mentioned, due to the uncertainties of the financial impact of COVID in 22 and 23, USM suspended the 2% test to qualify for additional funding. So all institutions were eligible for PAYGO fund for its share, prorated share of the 65 million. So Exhibit 7 shows the allocation of the PAYGO and ARB funds. In order to provide incentives for institutions that have made or continue to make progress to the 2% goal, DLS recommends restricting the allocation of the 65 million in PAYGO until institutions meet certain levels of spending and renewal. So back at the beginning of the document, you will see our recommended language that restricts the PAYGO, specifies the allocation of the funds and the spending requirements for the institutions to access these funds. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baker. Any questions for Ms. Baker? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. Chancellor Perman, good to see you. Why don't you come up, and any members of your team. We appreciate everybody's patience. Everybody is important, and it's just, this is just the natural course of the end, getting toward the end of the middle of session. So good to see you, Mr. Chancellor.
Chair Zucker, I subscribe highly to your point about everybody's important, and we're grateful just to have the time. Appreciate your leadership. To members of the subcommittee, it's good to see you all, literally. And I have with me Vice Chancellor Ellen Herbst, who's responsible for Administration and Finance, Mark Beck, who's our Director of Capital Projects. To your point, I will keep my testimony brief and focus on the issues raised by Ms. Baker, whose analysis I always appreciate. I do need to say that we're grateful for the governor's support, and looking around the room, grateful for the steadfast support that you all provide the USM. Let me comment, since the focus is on commitment to facilities renewal, and then answer the questions that have been posed. Before the pandemic, we'd seen a new level of commitment among our university presidents to address the critical need of their aging facilities. Now, the commitment didn't change during COVID, but our ability to achieve those spending goals did, for reasons that I know you totally understand. Some facility spending had to be deferred so that we could focus on urgent projects with demonstrable public safety impact, projects that made it possible to physically distance, to sanitize, to improve air quality. And yes, I think we came through quite well, and I'm glad we spent the money. We had to create, like many organizations, new ways of doing business during the pandemic. We needed to be operationally innovative. And yes, we're proud of what we accomplished, but we had to defer how we spent money. Let me turn to the issues that have been raised. First, DLS recommends that our Board of Regents update its facilities renewal policy to reflect current practices. specifically those related to state facilities. We support the recommendation. And in fact, this effort has already begun. It's being managed during this year's capital budget cycle. Next, DLS has asked whether, as part of our renewal backlog funding strategy, can we increase our annual level of ARB issuances, academic revenue bonds, which would be a workable substitute should we be unable to contribute plant funds according to the 2023 CIP. Is that workable? As you know, USM debt capacity is tied to a combination of the ARBs, the academic revenue bonds, and auxiliary bonds. And at least once a year, we evaluate debt capacity in the context of three things. One, our financial strength, as reported in the audited financial statements. Secondly, prior commitments not yet spent or not reflected in those statements. And finally, three, future capital spending needs, including ARB-funded facilities renewal. This evaluation becomes the basis for determining the amount of new bond spending that the Board of Regents should consider. And over the past 2 years, the board hasn't seen a basis for, nor the ability to, increase the number of revenue bond funded projects. The board will next approve the capital budget proposal in June. At that point, we'd be in a better position to consider increased facilities renewal funding from our own resources. Finally, I've been asked to comment on the recommendation that as a means of incentivizing progress toward the 2% facilities renewal goal, PAYGO funds should be restricted until institutions meet certain spending levels. As the analysis notes, in spring 2020, when we began to understand the acute fiscal fallout of the pandemic, we told our universities that in the FY22 budget cycle, we'd suspend the spending prerequisite for receiving a full share of the facilities renewal funding. And all institutions would be allowed to participate in any new funding provided by the state. That's what we told the universities. That's how the PAYGO and the deficiency appropriation funds were allocated last session. Then, more recently, when our universities began preparing their FY23 requests last year, universities or uncertainties by universities around their operating budgets required that we extend to the FY23 cycle the temporary pause on spending goals. And we reiterated this to everyone in January when we saw the governor's proposed $65 million in PAYGO funding. We explicitly reported during the 2021 session not only that FR spending guidelines would be temporarily modified to eliminate the planned FY21 increase, but that our universities could also cut their remaining facilities renewal balance by half on a one-time basis, and the FR levels for FY22 would be brought back to the FY21 base numbers. These very actions help preserve our bond rating. I've bragged about that in front of you before. In this uncertain time in higher education, the bond ratings affirmed are very good ratings just behind the states. and said that they had a stable outlook as they looked at us. So the actions that I've just related to you had a lot to do with that. Protected our collective financial strength. It allowed us to surmount additional pandemic-related challenges that came our way until we've gotten to this better state today. So, to be very frank, we were disappointed then to see restrictive language now being applied to the PAYGO funds. Now, I feel very strongly that it's unfair to now restrict access to additional funds at a time when they're most critically needed. The 2-year pause doesn't dilute our focus on maintenance spending. That's not what we did. It didn't diminish it as a priority. But now for FY22 and 23, to me, to us, it makes sense to allow all institutions to receive renewal funding and to benefit from this welcome infusion of state support. In fact, the institutions most severely challenged by enrollment and revenue drops, those most unable to adequately budget for maintenance, are the same ones that most need the PAYGO funds. The money would go a long way toward reducing their repair and renovation backlogs, and denying them these funds simply exacerbates their challenges around finances and facilities. Maybe the intent is good, but the timing, in my view, is poor. The good news in all of this is that we're optimistic we'll be able to reinstitute our annual spending requirements for FY24 and beyond. Again, I thank you all for your support. My colleagues and I are, of course, happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. Any questions for the Chancellor or the Chancellor's team? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now turn to the budgets for the Maryland Higher Education Commission. We will start with Kelly Norton. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. For the Maryland Higher Education Commission, there is $85.4 million in the CIP in fiscal '23. $67 million is for the Community College Construction and Grant Program, and $18.4 million is for the Community College Facilities Renewal Grant Program. The $67 million is in general obligation bonds, and the $18.4 million is in PAYGO general funds. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows the funding by program funding by fund type for the Community College Construction Grant Program. You see in fiscal '23, all funding for this program will be coming from GO bonds, as opposed to last year, which was a combination of GO bonds and PAYGO general funds. Exhibit 2 is the Community College Construction Grant Program funding from fiscal '28 through fiscal 2027, which is included in the CIP. The peak funding was in fiscal '21 at $87.3 million. For this year, again, as stated previously, is just the $67 million. Exhibit 3, from page 4 through page 8, has the 15 projects being funded at 10 community colleges across the state. The total cost for the projects listed is $518.9 million. The fiscal '23 allowance is 67 million, and the future funding in the CIP is 53.6 million. We turn now to the Facilities Renewal Grant Program. Let's see. It includes 18.4 million in PAYGO funding. 15 million is from the Dedicated Purpose Account Program. DBM anticipates splitting the $15 million for the DPA program equally between all 16 community colleges. If that money is not used within 5 years, it will revert to the rainy day fund. In addition to the $15 million, there's 3.4 million funding going to the Facility Renewal Grant Program, which is the statutory 5% of the construction grant program's $67 million. The community colleges have a backlog of about $116 million of worth of program, of renewal, facilities renewal that needs to be completed. The committee should consider amending the statute to set the mandate at the greater of 4 million or 5% of the amount of state funds authorized for the construction program to at least establish a mandated minimum funding level, as well as to allow for additional program funding in fiscal years when the construction program is funded at a higher level. Exhibit 4 shows how the 3.4 million will be split between these 8 community colleges for fiscal '23. On page 10, Exhibit 5 has the pre-authorizations for fiscal '24. There's $32.1 million in GO bonds going towards these 4 projects at these community colleges. The recommendations is to approve the PAYGO amount of $18.4 million for the Community College Facilities Renewal Grant Program. Recommending approving the $67 million in general obligation bond funding for the community college construction grant program, and approving the pre-authorization of $32.1 million in general obligation funding for the community college construction grant program for fiscal '24. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any committee members have a question? Okay, well, thank you very much for that great analysis. We'll now turn it over to the Maryland Higher Education Commission, if you all want to come down and start in any order you wish. Welcome. Appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Newman. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration for MHEC, and I'm joined by Dan Schuster, who is our capital expert and administers this grant year in and year out. I'd like to thank Ms. Norton for her analysis, and we concur with each of the 3 recommended actions. And we'd be happy to, I'd be happy to have Dan answer any questions.
Dan, we've got about 100 questions. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think we do have some public witnesses. Brad Phillips, come on up. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and please.
Oh, good evening, Chairman Zucker, members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. We are very supportive. Thank you for your support of the capital budget request. And we just have 2 additional projects that have escalated in cost due to supply constraints and other inflationary factors. And with that, we're asking for an additional $5.2 million to fund 2 projects. We have 1 project that we learned about last week from the Community College of Baltimore County that needs an additional $2.3 million for the Essex Wellness and Athletic Center renovation in addition. And we also have Montgomery College's Leggett Math and Science Building for furniture and equipment that needs an additional $2.9. The Montgomery College did not have a cost escalator in the project. And with these 2 projects included in our request, it's still below what's in the CIP for 2023. So with that, we respectfully request that we get this additional funding, which has secured a local match as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the 2.9 for Montgomery College. Give me the number again for the
2.3.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Committee will now turn our attention to the University of Maryland Medical System. Ann Wagner. Ms. Wagner, start whenever you wish.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So this is the capital budget analysis for the University of Maryland Medical System. As you can see with this first chart, the capital budget would provide $26 million in fiscal '23 over 2 projects. So the first project is for the Comprehensive Cancer and Organ Transplant Treatment Center. This would take up most of the funding in fiscal '23 of $25 million in GO bonds. Just to first start off with the kind of timeline of this project, design for the components related to the Cancer Center are basically complete, and construction is scheduled to start in fiscal '23. However, design for the Organ Transplant Treatment Center and then the parking garage expansion is just beginning, according to And so there is a question included in this analysis that asks to explain how this schedule and planned cash flow justify funding this project, or the components of this project in one, as the design phases are at kind of different timelines. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows the total funding, or estimated total funding for this project. It has increased slightly, so the striped bars to the left show last year's estimates, and then the solid bars to the right show this year's estimates. And most of the increase, it's a $25.3 million total increase, and that is mostly due to higher construction costs related to the pandemic and just higher construction costs overall. There has been a shift in how much funding is supporting construction, as in last year's estimates, I believe some of the funding for equipment was improperly put there when it should have been in the construction category. So that's why you're seeing a shift on the cost by use. And then I'll also note here that the current year CIP sets the state contribution at $125 million. This is despite budget language over the past few years that expresses the legislature's intent that the state contribution be $175 million for this project. And so then moving on to the second project that's funded this year, there is $1 million in GO bonds that would support the Shock Trauma Center. And I'll just jump to Exhibit 3 on page 7. This shows kind of the timeline of how state contributions and contributions would be budgeted in the current CIP, shown in the solid bars. So in fiscal '23, the state contribution is set at $1 million. This is slightly less than what was planned in prior CIPs, as the project has been delayed slightly, and so $3 million has been deferred to fiscal '25. And so that's why you're seeing an increase here compared to last year's CIP that didn't plan for funding going into fiscal '25. And so other than that, I believe the only other thing I'll note is that the DLS recommended actions are to approve the funding for both projects, the $25 million for the Cancer Center and then $1 million for the Shock Trauma Center. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you very much. Why don't we, Ms. Jones, if everyone want to come up here? Come on up. Before you start, I just wanted to thank Ms. Jones for sending out the video. Everybody should have gotten a video on the project. I just wanted to comment on how great it was that you had employees from different sectors kind of give input on what it should look like. I also wanted to, thank you, Dr. Cullen. You're a treasure for the state, and I have a very long memory and also works in thanking people, and I want to thank you publicly, which I've never done, on all your help and guidance when my father was dying of cancer in 2015, and I'll never forget that. Before you start, so, there's not going to be a chance where this committee is going to do anything with the $25 million or $1 million. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that that gets funded. But with that, please.
So I'm going to I'm going to try to read the room there and move very quickly. A comment I will make, Mr. Chairman, is you recognize Dr. Cullen, who is, I think, as compassionate as he is brilliant, and he's just an individual who never says no. I can text him anytime, day or night. He will let you know that I do, and he's willing to help anybody who is in need. So thank you for recognizing him. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair is not in the room anymore, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kristen Jones-Bryce, and I am the Chief External Affairs Officer for the University of Maryland Medical System. I want to begin my testimony by thanking DLS, Mr. Klein, and especially Ms. Wagner for her analysis. I feel like I've said that a million times in the past 2 weeks, but you are always wonderful to work with, so thank you. I also want to express my thanks to the governor for including these projects in the CIP, and especially thank Terry Garrity, Mark Nicole, Tiffany Colstitt, Christina Parati, and the entire team at DBM for the work we do with them every single year. And last but not at all least, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, your Vice Chair, and the members of this subcommittee and the Budget and Taxation Committee for your ongoing support of the University of Maryland Academic Medical Center and their budget priorities. As you mentioned already, Mr. Chair, with me today is Dr. Kevin Cullen, who leads the Marlene and Stuart Greenbaum Comprehensive Cancer Center and will provide testimony specific to that phase of the larger ambulatory project if there is time. In addition, we have brought along a smallish army of colleagues who are prepared to respond to questions should they arise. George Sprinkle is the Chief Financial Officer for the University of Maryland Medical Center. Linda Whitmore is the Director of Project Development, and Ron Cummings is the SVP and Chief Operating Officer for the Medical Center. We appreciate and support the analyst recommendations that funding for both projects be approved. Also appreciate your comments. As you know, the Shock Trauma Center is statutory designated as the primary adult resource center in the state of Maryland. They treat about 7,500 patients every year with a 76% save rate. The Comprehensive Cancer and Organ Transplant Treatment Centers constitutes a major project that will bring significant improvements to the ambulatory environments in which an increasing percentage of patients receive world-class clinical care that includes cancer, organ transplant, heart and vascular care, neurosciences, and otolaryngology. These programs are led by physicians who not only serve the patients at UMMC, but are also responsible for educating the future physicians in Maryland at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. So I do want to quickly acknowledge the issue that Ms. Wagner raised in her analysis and also in her testimony. While the two big components of this project physically separated as the programming evolved, I want to make sure I emphasize that the single purpose they serve is to provide more patient-centered environments that facilitate collaboration among clinical experts and the support teams that serve patients in many clinical disciplines across our system. My colleagues at the table are prepared to address the cash flow issues if you'd like to hear that as part of our testimony. If not, we will get that to you in writing. In closing, I just want to thank the committee. I want to thank the legislature as a whole and the administration for recognizing the importance of physical environments to healthcare and to healing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you can just submit that in writing for the cash flow. And does anyone else have anything else to?
I would like to give Dr. Cullen an opportunity.
Yes, please.
I just want to thank you very much, Chairman Zucker, for your kind words. And I want to thank everyone on the subcommittee for the incredible support that we've had. I'm glad that you had a moment to look at the video. We're incredibly excited about the capabilities that this new facility will bring to the citizens of Maryland and the capabilities that our cancer center brings to the people throughout the state. So thank you so much for your tremendous support. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Everybody good? Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Have a wonderful night and keep doing great stuff for the state and for Marylanders everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Committee will now turn to the Department of Juvenile Services. Madeline Miller. Begin whenever you're ready. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pull up the analysis document and make it a little bit nicer for you all, hopefully, to look at as I'm presenting. Okay, my name is Madeline Miller, and today I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for the Department of Juvenile Services. There are 5 projects for the department's capital improvement program, as shown on this cover page. But before I speak about the 2023 request and the DLS recommendations, I'm going to present some information about the department's performance measures and population trends. All right. So specifically, I'll start with the secure detention population trends. The detained average daily population consists of 3 populations: the predisposition secured detention population, the secured pending placement population, and the adult court authorized detention population, or the adult court population. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows ADP for these populations between fiscal 2011 through 2022 year to date. And you'll note that between 2014 and 2020 or so, prior to the start of the pandemic, ADP was showing signs of stabilization, but the drop in ADP for fiscal 21 and 22 shows there's been a significant decline in relation to the pandemic and other factors. The adult court authorized detention population has now made up over 50% of the detained population for the last 2 years, and that change in population makeup likely contributes to the change of average length of stay shown in Exhibit 2. Though ADP of the detained population has decreased compared with fiscal 2019 or pre-pandemic levels, ALOS for the secure detention, pending placement, and adult court authorized populations have increased since that time. That's shown here. And then moving to the Exhibit 3. Exhibit 3 compares the rated capacity of DJS's detention facilities to its fiscal 2021 ADP. Overall detention ADP was about 154.6 youth in fiscal 21. This is 228.4 youth below the department's rated capacity of 383. Excluding adult court authorized use, the detained ADP was only 74.7, or about 75, in fiscal 21. And now moving to the 4th exhibit. I'll address committed residential population trends now. This graph shows the committed residential ADP for each of the possible committed placements. Consistent with the overall DGS population trends, committed residential ADP continued to decline in fiscal 20, and then it dropped about 53.5% between fiscal 20 and 21. 2022 year-to-date ADP drops another 4.8% to under 140 youth. State-operated placements are programs at facilities that are operated and owned by DJS. This population saw a 61% decrease in fiscal 2021, with the number of youths falling from 97.4 to 38. All DJS secure committed facilities continue to operate under capacity, as shown in this exhibit. The residential committed population accounted for about 38.5% of total committed capacity in fiscal 2021. I'll now incorporate the discussion of the agency's performance with its new realignment plan. This new facility realignment plan was announced in November and proposes to close 2 treatment facilities and 2 detention facilities, as well as expanding the population served on the Cheltenham campus. That expansion will occur through an addition to the existing detention facility and through the construction of a new treatment center. By the end of fiscal 2022, the Thomas J.S. Waxter Children's Center, or Waxter, will be closed, and its detained female population moved to the Alfred D. Noyes Children's Center. Noyes currently serves male and female youth, but as part of the facility realignment plan, male youth currently placed there will be moved to the Cheltenham Youth Detention Center, or CYDC. The realignment plan results in the cancellation of the new female detention center project. The NFDC was a planned 48-bed detention center to be located on the Cheltenham campus. Accordingly, design of the NFDC was halted in fall 2021 when the department realized its plans were changing. And the NFDC has been deleted from the 2022 capital improvement program. Instead, the department intends to construct a 24-bed addition to the CYDC to accommodate female youth.
When this addition is complete, the female population of Noyes would be relocated to CYCD and the Noyes facility would be closed. Accordingly, the project to construct a new Noyes detention center is removed from the capital improvement program. It is as shown in Exhibit 7 on the last page of the document. Returning to the realignment plan on page 11, the department intends to construct a new treatment facility that will serve both youth, female and male youth on the site of the now canceled NFDC. The Cheltenham Youth Treatment Center, or CYTC, will have about 48 beds as well. Authorization for this project comes in the form of an amendment to the fiscal 22 general obligation bond authorization made for the purpose of starting the construction phase of the now canceled NFDC. The plan is to re-engage the design team to adapt the current NFDC schematic and design the new CYTC. DBM intends to expedite its review of the Part 1 and Part 2 program plan for this project, which is required before BPW can give its approval for any construction contracts. And I'd also like to note that the project schedule communicated by DBM would start construction in January 2023, which the Department of Legislative Services believes is likely an aggressive assumption. Given that DLS recommends that prior authorized funds be reduced to leave just over $8.4 million to complete design and allow for a construction contract, including any contracts for the demolition of existing buildings on the site and site development, to be bid and be awarded perhaps as early as March 2023. So more formally to state it, DLS recommends that the Budget Committees approve the amendment to prior authorization and provide funding for the CYTC, but we recommend that the amount for the CYTC be reduced by $15 million. DLS further recommends adding budget bill language to pre-authorize GO bond funding in fiscals 2024 and 2025 to ensure the BPW would be able to approve a construction contract in fiscal 23. Then, once the CYTC is complete, scheduled for fiscal 2025, DJS will close both the Green Ridge Youth Center and the Mountain View Treatment Center. Today, DLS asked that DJS include in its testimony its plans for staff working at both facilities once they're relocated. Implementing the department's facility realignment plan will decrease the capacity of the detention facilities as well as increase the capacity of the committed facilities. Exhibit 6 shows recent trends in the orange and in yellow for how ADP has changed from pre-pandemic to current, for like more up-to-date or current times. And the 2 shades of green for both the detention and committed facilities show how current capacity will change following the implementation of the plan. While current capacity of the committed facilities is 110, bed space will increase to 150 once the Green Ridge Youth Center and Mountain View Treatment Center have been closed and the CYTC opens. That's also assuming that the renovations to the Garrett Children's Center are completed, increasing that facility's capacity from 8 to 24 males. The summary of fiscal 2023 funded state-owned projects begins on page 14. The first is the BCJJC. This will expand space for additional educational programming and administrative services within the BCJJC. The current facility will be expanded by constructing a building addition on site adjacent to the facility. Various project design changes have delayed this project in the past. However, the fiscal 23 capital budget bill provides $10.3 million in general obligation bond funding to complete the funding for this project. DLS recommends approving these funds. The second project that receives funding is the addition for female youth in the Cheltenham Youth Detention Center. This 24-bed addition is part of the facility realignment plan discussed in the issues section. And as stated, and assuming that the facility realignment plan is fully implemented, following the completion of the plan, this will leave the statewide capacity of female detention centers at 30 when the program is completed. DLS therefore is asking that the department comment on its anticipated needs for bed space for detained female youth through fiscal '25, when construction is expected to conclude. As part of Exhibit 6, I'll show if here, for the detention centers, ADP in fiscal 2021 was 17.3 for female youth, which is lower than the ADPs of 2020 and 2019, which were 35.2 and 30.5 respectively. So we're just asking that the department provide more detail on the population need. Then the fiscal 23 capital budget provides $1.5 million in general obligation bonds to begin design in July 2020. DLS recommends approving this funding. Page 15 provides detail on the impact to the operating budget that those two projects will have. And then onto the final page, page 16, provides additional information about the 3 out-year projects in the capital improvement program. There's the CYTC project, which I spoke about earlier in the issues section. Next is the Charles H. Hickey Junior School Detention Center in Baltimore County. This project would construct a 72-bed detention facility, and also in the same area, the Charles H. Hickey Junior School Combined Services Building and Regional Warehouse is the third item. This facility would be the central storage site for equipment and supplies to GGS facilities located in the nearby region. Just to kind of provide the final summary to review, DLS has 5 recommended actions for this analysis. Items 1 and 2 are consistent with the governor's allowance, and items 3 through 5 are relevant to the new CYTC. That concludes my analysis, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that very thorough analysis. Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have, hundreds of people in the audience waiting for you and standing room only. But Secretary Abbott, thank you for your patience. And please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Sam Abbott, Secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services. And with me is my Director of Capital Planning, Maria Martin, and Deputy Director of Capital Planning, Colette Coleman-Price. I want to thank Ms. Miller for her excellent analysis, and I'll just comment that we agree with all the recommended actions, and we'd be happy to take any questions. We did provide a written response.
We did. It was very thorough, Mr. Secretary. Any questions? Mr. Secretary, your whole team, thank you. So, Senator Edwards, please.
Just a comment. We had talked previously and talked about shutting down the Mountain View Treatment Center in Garrett and Green Ridge and Allegheny, which kind of will be phased because a lot of these people know they're going to shut down and are going to be looking to go somewhere else. You've been very good in the past when we've cut back in some of these facilities out in the mountains to find jobs for these people close by. So I'm asking that whether you're there, you can pass along to your next person with the new administration looking at the date, that they also consider keeping these people employed and put them in places close by so they don't have to uproot their families to leave.
I appreciate that, Senator, and I agree with you, and that's been our history to place all of our staff. We have closed facilities in the past, a number of facilities. We've never laid anybody off, and we don't intend to do that this time around either.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other questions? Secretary, thank you again. Colleagues, that concludes today's budget hearings. We're adjourned.